You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello and welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. My name is Paige and I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. Hey, I wanted to give a little intro and kind of help to set the stage for this conversation I had with Lexi and Lindsay Kite. We are thrilled to announce that we are going to be collaborating on a evening workshop in Salt Lake City, Utah on April 4th from 6:30 to 9 o'clock. We're also doing this with Jesse Hoffman, who many of you might know from previous podcast episodes. So the four of us are getting together. We're putting on an in-person workshop in Salt Lake City. It's going to be called Body of Evidence. It's a workshop all about separating fact from fiction in a world of fad diets and faulty body image fixes. So you can expect to have a lot of great scientific conversations about nutrition, body image, intuitive eating. It'd be a really cool event to bring your family to if you feel like they might be interested, or if you're working on this stuff and they don't quite get it. This might be an event to bring a spouse or parents or girlfriends or anybody with you. It could be a lot of fun. So if you're interested in that, please head over to positive-nutrition.com/workshop, or just click on the link in the show notes here, and you'll be directed to the info page. And the price is $25 for a ticket. It will go up to $35 in a week after this podcast airs. So be sure to do that. If you're interested and local and can make it, we'd love to see you there. Okay, so Lexi and Lindsay and I recorded this podcast episode together in person in my office in Salt Lake City. And, it has just been tricky to even talk about like how to put this information out there in a way that's going to be informative and interesting, and also like helpful, and maybe even like an agent for change, without hopefully alienating or confusing or harming anybody who's listening. So I have to say that Lexi and Lindsay had hives while recording this episode. It's such a tricky subject to talk about religion and deeply held beliefs. Now, you have to know that we did dive into the Mormon religion, which is also known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS, or Mormon. Those are all kind of different ways that you might have heard that religion referred to. So as many of you probably know, the Intermountain West, Utah specifically, has a lot of members of the church here. And so we thought that this topic could be really relevant for local folks to kind of get thinking about some of the messaging culturally we get about bodies. And then also, I thought I wanted to kind of bridge the gap as well with anybody who isn't local or who kind of feels like this might be a fringy topic. I think, the more I learn about other, areas of the world and other practices of religion, the more I see, wow, there's so much we all have in common. And I've heard, in the Jewish community and in the evangelical community, or the Muslim community, there's a lot of similar themes of messaging about bodies and how that might play out in terms of body image concerns. So I'm hoping that, this is informative for anybody who doesn't know a lot about the LDS religion to kind of get a little bit of an insight. And then also I'm hoping that we all just kind of understand how much this is relatable to so many communities around the world. And we're also talking about this topic because Lexi and Lindsay and I discussed about how much we get this question. Is body image a bigger deal or of more importance here in this area of the country or the world versus other areas? We both get that question a lot, so I thought, who better to dive into about this topic than Lexi and Lindsay, who have PhDs and do body image work day in, day out, and also folks like Lexi and Lindsay who are also active members of the LDS religion. So we're diving into this topic. It's very tricky. We're all a little bit nervous to kind of go into this realm, but what the intention is and the hope is that this is helpful and effective locally, and also helpful and effective maybe even abroad and in different ways, different kind of themes of body image struggles that might come up in lots and lots of different cultures and religions all throughout the world. So with that long introduction, I'm super excited to share this episode with you with Lexi and Lindsay, Kite of Beauty Redefined, and let's dive in. Welcome back to Nutrition Matters Podcast. Thanks for joining me for the second time.
Oh, We're happy to be here. We just love you, so this is great.
Well, I just love you. Okay, so we wanted to record a podcast about a topic that's near and dear to all three of our hearts because we all happen to live in Salt Lake City, Utah. We're doing, similar work but in different arenas, and we come across lots of themes that when we got together and we were like, let's record another podcast, it was like, oh, this topic is tricky but super important. So what we're going to be talking about is exploring the culture of Utah and the religious culture, the sort of the history and femininity and femalehood and body image and food and diets and kind of how all of that comes together here for us. So I wanted to frame the conversation just by saying the reason that this came up for me is obviously I live and practice here, and so do you. And one time on Instagram I posted a Q&A, just a really broad, ask me whatever. And one person reached out saying, why do you think there's so much body preoccupation in Utah? And I reposted that and I just said, this is a huge topic. This would require so much exploration. I'm not even going to go there, but great question. And the amount of DMs I got from people seeing that someone had asked that question, some people were outraged by the question. Some people were like, yes, I've totally noticed that too. And other people were kind of in the middle. So I thought, who better to talk about that than with you two who live and work here and also know a lot about those topics. So
yes, that is a big question, and I think it'll be super relevant for any listeners, even if they don't live in Salt Lake City or in Utah or familiar.
Lindsay. Oh, yeah. That's good.
Totally. So one of the big factors that most people are probably aware of is that the church headquarters for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the LDS or Mormon Church, is here in Salt Lake City. Yeah, we're coming from an inside perspective, but we feel it is our responsibility to critique the parts that are hurtful to people, that could improve, that people who continue to be engaged with Mormonism could have a much better experience within the church and within the culture if they're not members by thinking of things a little bit differently, and even in ways that are maybe more in line with the actual doctrine than the ways the culture currently practices it, especially in terms of our views about bodies.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're talking about the culture. Like, we're critiquing the culture right here.
Right.
Yeah. So talk about what the implications are for why modesty becomes such an important part of the culture and an important part of kind of the equation there.
Yeah.
Some of our most popular posts at Beauty Redefined by far have been where we critique modesty and dress codes. Because ever since about 2011, we started talking about this. Before anybody else was, we started critiquing the phrase and the idea that modest is hottest. Because what you're saying when you're saying modest is hottest is...
Which is a popular phrase.
A very popular phrase.
Yeah.
In Christianity,
Yeah.
in Mormondom, in lots of other cultures. Is... thinking about modesty as how somebody looks at you and how they see you and approve of you or disapprove of you, that it's hot, that it's attractive to be modest. And so that's placing this emphasis on women's looks above all else, which is something that we critique so much. And so our most popular post ever on Instagram that got 13,000 likes a few months ago was one where we were critiquing dress codes. And I'm just going to read the main caption. We said, too many dress codes and modesty lessons treat girls as objects to be viewed and threats to be mitigated, rather than people to be respected. They hyper-focus on the female parts in need of covering, thus sexualizing those parts. Dress codes like these don't prevent girls from being viewed as sexual objects, they reinforce it.
And this was in response to something that we see all the time, actually. This happens at church activities, church dances, but also at schools all the time, and definitely not exclusive to the Mormon church. We see dress codes being posted and enforced that are 1,000 things long for girls. Keep your shoulders covered, no spaghetti straps, no cleavage, dresses need to show no armpit, no midriff can be showing. Like, literally, they will go inch by inch down a girl's body, setting rules for what can and cannot be shown and what types of fabrics need to be on it, and whether or not that fabric can be up against the skin if it's too tight, it's really, really extensive. And then for boys...
So then no wonder why, girls are...
Hyper
picking themselves
Absolutely.
because they're wondering, hey, do I fit? Am I going to be okay?
And the problem is the list for boys is usually like, wear a tie, keep your pants pulled up, the end. And so then the problem really comes in when girls show up at these events, activities, whether it's a dance or even just like a church event, like on a Wednesday night or whatever. Girls will show up and they might not be wearing something that somebody there thinks is appropriate. And so then it'll be left up to the discretion of individual church leaders to say, I don't think you look appropriate. I'm afraid that other boys who are at this event are going to be distracted by your legs.
Or male leaders.
Or a male leader is going to see,
time.
in your swimsuit at camp or whatever. And so you need to put on a t-shirt or a one-piece or whatever. And so this is, once again, taking an idea that could be something that's cool and nice, that your body is sacred and we have certain dress standards at church or school or work or whatever, but then it's taking that idea to such an extreme that women are being perceived as objects to be looked at, to be judged, to be analyzed, and really as sexual objects that are threats to be mitigated. There's so much fear around women's bodies provoking responses in boys and men, where the girls are bearing full responsibility for the responses that are supposedly provoked by what they're wearing, even if that response wouldn't be provoked in somebody, whether or not they're wearing. Does that make sense? That response could be provoked by them being fully dressed, fully modest, if a man is choosing to perceive her that way.
Well, and it's so unfair, honestly, to girls of size too.
Right.
Like, okay, so you're a thinner girl, and you're not going to have cleavage, and things aren't going to be as tight on you, and then if you're a larger girl, it's going to be harder to even meet those standards, right?
Oh my gosh, there's so many problems. I just feel like when we focus so much on modesty, and some wards or stakes or schools or whatever it is beyond religion, some of them don't fixate so much on the inches. They don't get out the ruler and see how thick the tank top strap is. They don't have girls measure how high above the knee their shorts are. But lots and lots do. And when we see this kind of these retrenched attitudes that girls and women have to be covered this much, we are teaching them that they are threats, that they are sexual objects that are being seen, that are being looked at, that are being perceived first as sexual and second as human. But we're also teaching boys and men that girls and women are sexual first, that their parts are sexual, that shoulders are suddenly sexy, that knees are sexy. We are conditioning boys and men in a culture where we don't talk about sex, where we try to keep things very chaste and pure, we're conditioning these boys and men to see girls and women who are just thinking, feeling humans as parts. And this came up in a conversation I had with one of my relatives very recently. She told me she was talking to a single man very close to her. And this guy who is LDS said, I wish girls wouldn't wear leggings. They have no idea what it does to me. And I thought, yeah, I've heard this a million times. We've written a lot about this at Beauty Redefined. The problem here is first that modesty is so subjective. One woman's leggings that she's meaning to be sexy to show off all the right curves are another woman's stretchy pants that fit after she had a baby or gained some weight or can't afford new clothes.
And covering her legs
and
so
covering
that
her.
She will be modest.
Oh my gosh, it is so subjective. And all I want to say to so many boys and men who feel this way about things that turn them on about women is, first of all, she is inherently human first. She is not a sexual object first, despite what you have learned to believe about her and her parts. But second, it's okay if you are sexually attracted to people. For you to feel such shame about thinking sexual thoughts, that's what scares me. I want you to think, okay, so I thought she was attractive. I had a couple thoughts about sex or her, her sexiness. Cool. When you feel shame about that, you're going to go back for more. Mm-hmm. You're going to view every girl as parts. You're going to look her up and down. You're going to seek out those pictures. You're going to seek out all the porn you can. You're going to do whatever you can to just feed that shame spiral that tells you, I shouldn't see women as sexy. I do see women as sexy. I need to see more women as sexy. And it just goes on and on.
And also I've already ruined it.
Yes,
I've already
exactly.
had that
so
thought.
Discouraged.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I can't help but just have this blaring thing come up when you're describing all this experience of the poor girl who gets all this messaging about her body. How does she not internalize, like, wow, this body is something to be ashamed of?
Yes.
Of course she's going to objectify.
Of course.
And feel like, man, my body is like so so shameful and so dirty and so wrong.
And so sexual, and my power comes from my ability to be sexually attractive, you know?
So
it's both.
It's this bad thing that then becomes an object, which then makes it easier to mistreat it in the form of, eating disorders, or that's where my head goes, because I see that. But then also, okay, wait a minute, like if I wear that, I get that reaction, or I get that power. You kind of like maybe just showed me exactly like how I can have some power.
Exactly.
Here,
in our culture, girls get so many messages reinforcing the idea that beauty is of utmost importance, and that beauty looks a certain way, and that sexual appeal in particular is the way that you can get the most acceptance, the most validation. Even within a religious setting, you'll be able to attract the best possible partner.
Which is such mixed messages.
Right.
Like, women are queens of mixed messages, I feel. It's so hard. It's like, be assertive, but don't be like too mean, or be nice, but not too nice. And then
be sexy, but not too sexy.
Right. But it's this mixed message of you can't be sexy, but also you need to be sexy so that you can attract the right guy or whatever.
Right.
It's such a no wonder it's confusing and,
For sure.
and difficult.
Yeah, girls and women receive really the bad end of the stick in this, because the reason this whole modesty thing is put on our radar so often is because we're contacted by girls or their moms who talk to us about how they showed up at a church activity or at church itself or at any other event where people were making decisions about who was dressed appropriately and who wasn't. And they're telling us that their girls were sent home or back to the parking lot or had their tickets revoked for the dance because they show up in something that some person deems inappropriate, even if it's the dress that their mom helped them pick out, that they're, that was passed down to them, that fit great last year. They're showing up wearing their soccer uniform to young women's activities. And it's out of necessity. It's out of sometimes cost effectiveness. If they don't have the ability to buy a new dress or a skirt that's a little longer or less tight, they're dressing sometimes out of looking cute, wanting to feel cute, wearing the same clothes as other girls at school. It could be any variety of things. And honestly, what this comes down to is that it doesn't matter why she's wearing what she is or what she looks like. If we're approaching this from a place of understanding that she is more than just a body, then we need to love her. We need to see her as a human and not as an object.
Yes.
Exactly. And that really kind of cuts to the core of all of this stuff. It gets so complicated when we're thinking, like, yeah, of course, like, girls are sent these messages that they should be beautiful and sexy, and then they're told that they shouldn't. So what should they do? What they should do is learn about all of our culture's messages that have taught them that their body is the most important thing about them. Learn how that has sunk into their consciousness and shaped the way they think about their bodies, the way they treat their bodies, and also the way they dress. But then help them to rebel against those messages, to recognize how much it hurts all of us to think of ourselves in terms of something to look at, whether it's how we feed our bodies or how we dress our bodies. And after that point, we need to let people make decisions for themselves. They can decide what they feel most comfortable in. They can recognize that self-objectification, which is like our huge message that we've been shouting from the rooftops for years, self-objectification is what happens when you picture the way you look all day long. You're picturing yourself from an outsider's perspective as you move throughout your life. And most girls and women do this, increasingly more so all the time. It's totally an epidemic. And it prevents us from fully focusing on literally anything, any task at hand. It also prevents us from engaging in healthy behaviors. It drives depression, anxiety. If you're fixated on what you look like and you never will look right according to the ideals, then we're at a loss.
Meet all the demands of you're never enough.
We
you're
never
doing
can.
it right.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so this whole idea of modesty and policing people's dress in any setting needs to come down to teaching girls to recognize all these messages that have shaped the way they might think about their bodies and the way they dress, to teach them to focus first on how they feel most comfortable, and to teach them to recognize when they're self-objectifying, because clothing certainly plays a big role in that. If you're wearing something that exposes more of your body than you yourself are comfortable with, even if it's just too tight, or even if it's too loose, if it's showing, more cleavage than you might normally want to. If you're thinking about your cleavage, or you're thinking about your stomach rolls or your cellulite or whatever, you're going to be put into a mode of self-objectification. And wearing different clothing can help prevent that.
I love that reframe.
Yeah.
And the thing that's such a big ask of the culture is it's asking folks who are in leadership positions to teach these girls something that, like, I know from experience, many adult women who are their leaders aren't aware of themselves.
Yeah. And the men who wrote the rules certainly don't understand.
That's another layer, right? It's probably not women writing these rules.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't. We've talked to people at church headquarters that understand that there are some issues that surround the ways modesty is discussed, and some of it was because stuff was written a long time ago, and some of it was because it wasn't written with our current knowledge of what happens when you treat girls and women as sexual objects and bodies first.
And a lot of it is just written not even maliciously, but it's from a male perspective,
Sure.
Men don't grow up in female bodies being looked at, being evaluated, being valued so much of the time based on how our bodies appear, but also being validated based on how our bodies appear. It's a really complicated world to live in, but men are writing rules for women and, writing everything you could think of in any walk of life from their own perspective without understanding what it's like to be inside a woman's body. And this innately is objectification, because when you are an outside viewer to somebody else, it's easy to look at that person as maybe a little less than human. It's a series of parts, a set of objects to be evaluated and viewed and even ogled at times. But when we're thinking about it from a female perspective from the inside, we really want to put that perspective and the onus back on girls and women ourselves to learn about how we feel about our bodies, how that influences the way we think about and dress our bodies, and then be able to dress in ways that can minimize that tendency to self-objectify.
And Lindsay and I feel so strongly about this and have written and spoken about this for years, despite a lot of backlash. There are a lot of critics who say you're crazy. I can't believe you're just telling people to go out and wear whatever they want. We're not. We're telling people that we love and care about girls and women. We desperately love and care about girls and women and want them to understand for themselves that they are more than bodies. And when you can understand that you are more than a body, your life opens up. You are much more prone to raise your hand in class and to play sports and to walk up to the front of that room and bear your testimony. You are much more prone to look out instead of in, to serve and lead and care about people instead of just live your life in this very self-conscious, self-objectifying position where you're constantly thinking about how you look, and how you look impacts other people. That breaks my heart. It breaks my heart for myself. For the many years I thought modesty didn't apply to me because I was too unattractive to be sexually attractive to people. I remember being in young women's lessons and being a little bit chunkier than the other girls. And when the young women's leaders were saying, you need to be careful with boys and missionaries, you should mess up your hair, you should make sure you're dressing modestly so you don't look sexually attractive to them, I thought, that doesn't apply to me. I can shut off my brain because they're not going to think I'm attractive anyway. In a lot of ways, we are setting girls up to believe that their first job is to be sexy and to be sexually attractive. And lots of girls don't feel like they even qualify for that. And so that's a new form of like shaming. It is, you know?
Totally.
Because modesty impacts girls of different sizes and shapes differently.
That's an important and different like gender identities.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a huge topic that we're like hitting on this tiny little fraction, but
just the surface.
There's so much to it.
There's so much to it.
So what if someone's listening who's like, hey, I'm an active member of the LDS Church and I really like the modesty standards and I like the way I dress. You know, I want them to know, and I want to hear your thoughts too. I want them to know, like, nobody's saying, like, question that and don't do that.
Yeah.
But I think what we're trying to say is understand why, and if you do this work of looking at all of the stuff that plays into how we feel about our bodies, and if you come out on the other side and you say, yeah, even with all that in mind, this is really where I want to land. This is what makes the most sense for me. I think we all would say awesome, right?
We would say good. And I would also say that if we're charged to love one another, if we're charged to bear one another's burdens, one of the best ways we can do that is to think about how we're all impacted by the messages we share, especially the cultural messages. And I can tell you from a research-driven perspective that when you break somebody down into parts and make them think about their parts incessantly, that hurts them. It causes them to self-objectify. It causes them throughout their lives to think about themselves as parts in need of fixing first. We don't want that for girls and women, and you don't want that either.
Right. And I really like that question because that's one of the most important aspects of this conversation, is that if you decide you want to dress a certain way, whether it's according to church modesty guidelines or whatever, that's awesome, and we and everyone else should support whatever that decision is.
Yeah.
Because that's on you. That it is such a personal thing to determine what is modest. And so we could give guidelines all day long about whether it's from a church perspective, a self-objectification, research perspective. We could say, okay, keeping your shoulders and your knees covered prevents this, and this, and that means you're modest. But we're not going to do that. And actually, we're going to let you know that it is much more subjective and much more personal than any list of guidelines that we or anyone else could ever give, because modesty, again, looks different on every body. You could give 3 different girls or women the exact same shirt or dress, and some people are going to think it looks modest on some, and some people are going to think it looks really immodest and inappropriate on others, just depending on how it falls and, you know, how big their chest and booty are, whatever. But I think the most important thing is to remember that you get to determine those rules for yourself. And you can, of course, within families, we can all work on rules and, you know, figure out what's really appropriate for each one of us. But that's where us enforcing the rules, I think, kind of needs to end, because it's a really big problem when girls start opting out of church activities, school dances, sports, because other people don't like how they're dressed. You know, it comes down to compassion in a lot of ways. Our hearts just break for all the emails we receive from girls and their moms and anyone else who says that my daughter was sent home and sat on a picnic table for the rest of the night alone crying because she didn't have a ride home, and they told her that her shorts were too short to be in the church building in a group of other girls and women. What is the threat there? What we need to be focusing on, especially in a church setting, is simply loving and respecting other people. Don't minimize them to a body, even if you hate what they're wearing, even if you think it's totally inappropriate for the setting. You know who probably feels the most uncomfortable in that situation if their outfit really is inappropriate for the setting? The person wearing the outfit. And that's a lesson that can be learned on its own. If you show up to a a situation where you're underdressed or overdressed or inappropriately dressed in any way, that's a lesson that we all get to learn over time on our own, and we can make adjustments as we go.
Yeah.
But what we don't need is someone telling us that we are not welcome here because other people might see our legs or our chests or a midriff or whatever. And that's one of the big issues with that whole question of, but what about my son and what about my husband, is that it's again putting the blame on women for men's responses. And we know that people respond to visual stimulation in all different ways. There could be someone, you know, looking amazing in a bikini, and somebody would look at that and be, you know, extremely sexually attracted and unable to think any other thoughts. But you could also look at that person and say, okay, yeah, she's attractive, looks great, but also she's a person, and I'm going to train my thoughts onto something else more important.
And feel less shame about it.
Yeah.
I think the key here is really shame in so many ways. I've talked to women whom I love so dearly who tell me that their husbands have problems with porn. And what I tell them is to love your husband. If you can love him and tell him that no matter what, it's okay, like it's all good, it's okay, and come at him with compassion, he's going to feel less compulsive about his behavior. Like, I understand that for a lot of women, it feels like a betrayal to think about your husband looking at something behind your back and thinking about women behind your back, and I hate the thought of it. But a lot of that addiction and that compulsion comes because of shame. You know, in lots of cultures, women go topless to the beach, and you don't see men walking around just enthralled with what they're seeing, you know, like incapable of thinking or seeing anything else, because they have grown up seeing women and seeing that women aren't just for sex. You know, breasts are for lots of things. They feed babies.
Yeah, including feeding a child.
I also want to be really clear that we are not saying that pornography is a positive thing or okay. Like, this is kind of a tricky subject, but we have always been very openly against pornography, and that's because pornography overwhelmingly has been created for the pleasure of men, and it has been created at the expense of women.
Yes.
Women who, we don't know if they have been trafficked, we don't know anything about those women, whether they've consented to be there, whether they are drugged intentionally or unintentionally, to their knowledge or not. Pornography is foundationally objectifying. It is treating women, overwhelmingly women, as objects to be used and consumed and discarded. And what we know from a lot of research is that pornography is overwhelmingly violent toward women.
Yes.
It convinces viewers, especially men, that women enjoy violence and to be hurt, whether they say no, whether they say please stop, or any other objection. And it causes men to be less emotionally attached and invested in their own partners. Pornography is, the objectification in pornography, sexual objectification to that level, does a lot of harm. And so that's why men, especially within conservative churches, feel so much shame when they do see those images. They've been taught their whole lives that seeing sex outside of marriage is wrong and bad, and so naturally there's shame there. But then the other angle on that is that, from a research perspective, pornography causes objectification. Women are being objectified, and then men learn to see women as objects in real life for objectification. So the really tricky thing is, men who have been taught that to avoid pornography and then are exposed to pornography, then they go to church, they go to work, they go to the supermarket, they drive down the freeway, whatever, and women become parts to them. Women become something for sexual stimulation.
Yes.
And that's something that needs to be very actively worked against.
Well, and I think ultimately what you're saying about men and boys is, like, we need to believe that they're capable
Yes.
of more than what we are giving them credit for currently.
Yes, we write about that a lot.
Yeah.
Like, they are agents unto themselves, just like girls and women are.
I really like that spin on the modesty idea, and that reframing of, like, I mean, we flushed that out really well with women, but also just on the other side of the coin, like, believing that men and boys are also, like, capable of not objectifying. They can learn that, right? This isn't something you're born with, you can learn that skill.
No, not at all. Yeah, we put all the responsibility on girls and women to bear the burden of men's and other women's reactions to their bodies. But that takes away all the responsibility from men, and it kind of makes people think that men are animals.
Right.
That they
That's
respond
not
to
fair.
visual stimulation in whatever way their body thinks it needs to, and there is no controlling it. But that is not true at all. We teach boys and men that girls and women are something to be looked at and evaluated every time we say, like, oh, she shouldn't be wearing that. And every time we discuss a girl or woman as parts of herself that are showing or that need to be covered, or, you know, any other thing that reduces her to anything less than a fully thinking, feeling human being who is as much a son or daughter of God as any one of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything else that you hear as like a criticism, or anything that we can anticipate that somebody who these are really sensitive subjects for might be like, oh, they're not speaking to my experience, or they're leaving me out, or they're offending me in this way. Like, I just want to make sure people leave this episode, I'm hoping that they have, A, something to think about, and B, just feel really respected, where they are. I don't want it to feel offensive. I mean, I know that's a hard ask, but
I think in the time that we've been doing this work, and we even have like an LDS modesty lesson plan, because a lot of the young women's lessons throughout the year.
Can I post that in my link?
Yeah, you can post a link to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Post a link to it. We have it behind a paywall, so you have to donate. Even like you can donate 50 cents, but just so that it doesn't.
It's not just public.
Because we're a secular nonprofit.
Right.
So.
No, that's great, because I actually get people reaching out to me asking, how do I teach this at church? And I'm like, I can't even begin to.
Yeah, it's a big subject.
Yeah. So this is great to know that's a resource.
Yes. It's been very important for us, and thousands of people have used it, and it has been able to help them. I think the main key here is that if we look at girls and women with compassion and love, and boys and men with compassion and love, then we change the way we talk about things. And we reframe the ways we think about modesty, which is an important concept. We're not saying throw out modesty or throw out dress codes. They help us in certain situations to dress appropriately and to like dress the same, like
to have a shared understanding of what's appropriate.
And that's good. That's a really good thing. And I think that it's just up to each one of us to look at ourselves and others with compassion. And when we look at ourselves first and foremost as so much more than a body, as a person, a thinking, feeling, capable person who has purpose and work and worth in this world. And when we look at everybody else the same way, then girls and women, we stop pitting ourselves against each other. We stop, when you're with your husband, you stop looking at another woman who you might think is attractive and feel mad at her. You stop looking at women when you're at the swimming pool and you see women that she has a breast augmentation, or she's wearing a really sexy swimming suit, or she's just prancing around that pool. And instead of looking at her and thinking like, you're kidding me, like I wish he wasn't seeing this right now, I wish my son wasn't seeing this. That's what we do, Instead of thinking that way, it is so much easier to look at girls and women with compassion as more than bodies. I can promise you I do this. Like, I have a wonderful husband who I love so much and care so much about him. And when I see attractive women in front of both of us, I'm not mad at those women. And I'm not mad at my husband. And I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, how is he feeling? Is he comparing me to her? Does he think she's way hot? I can honestly tell you I'm not thinking those things, because I trust that my wonderful husband sees women as more than bodies. And if he thinks she's cute, cool. I think guys are cute. We're all sexual beings.
Cuteness to go around
There
too,
is.
right?
Yeah, that's true.
It's a scarce commodity.
Yeah, it's not a
is.
limited resource.
Yeah.
If you just lead with love, then oh my gosh.
And when we simplify things that way, it really helps too when there are people who transgress those dress codes, when there are people who we perceive as, dressing inappropriately in any setting, even if it is technically inappropriate and outside of the dress code. There's also those gray areas where things are subjective. You might not wear that, but she's wearing that and no one else seems to think it's a problem. What it comes down to is that none of that really matters if we're looking with compassion, if we're looking at others as more than just bodies. And it actually simplifies things in just a really beautiful way, because we can err on the side of love rather than erring on the side of protecting other people who may or may not perceive her in, a sexual way or an inappropriate way and act or think in those ways. Instead, we can err on the side of, I'm glad she's here. I'm glad she has friends and loved ones and leaders here where she can learn about subjects that are uplifting and important to her and can add value to her life. We don't look at her as a threat. We look at her as an asset to our community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that first question that I kind of started off with was, is Utah a particularly fraught place for body image issues? I recognize that that's like a really loaded question, and I don't think there is any easy answer.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear your opinion on this, because I think there's a lot of people interested, obviously.
Yeah. We get that question all the time. And the answer is yes. It does. It seems to be that Utah is a particularly complex place for dealing with body issues. We can see that from a variety of different metrics.
Yes.
One of those is the rates of plastic surgery. So we don't have super updated numbers on that. What we know is that Salt Lake City was ranked the vainest city in the nation in 2007 by Forbes magazine, and that was based on the number of plastic surgeons per capita. We were higher than other cities of comparable size significantly, and also higher or comparable to cities like LA, Miami, New York in terms of cosmetic surgery. People come from out of state. Yes, that's a factor because it's a little bit cheaper here. We have a University of Utah Medical School with a good cosmetic surgery department, so they pump out a lot of surgeons and they stay here because this is a great place to live.
Sure. So there's elements that are like that's a tough thing to totally measure.
Right. Yeah.
And know why. There's also a lot of dentists who happen to
Yes,
be Mormon.
totally.
That's so
Doesn't
true.
mean, like,
and they stay here
it's a
because
gene or
it's a
something.
nice
Yeah.
place to live
Yeah.
and it's very a family-oriented place. We also know that cosmetic surgery is especially prevalent here because we tend to be wealthy in this area. There's a higher wealth per capita, and there's also a lot of women who stay home, a lot of stay-at-home moms and women who stay home to take care of their kids, and that leads to extra time on our hands in a lot of ways. And there's also just a lot of pressure here. We have the highest birth rate per capita to the youngest moms. And so we've got young women with a lot of kids, and they face a lot of pressure to, in quotes, get your body back. There's a ton of marketing, a ton of money that goes into marketing directly at young moms, new moms, telling them that their bodies apparently went away as soon as they gave birth, and they need to be gotten back through cosmetic surgery. There's a mommy makeover that's a set of 3 surgeries that happens immediately after giving birth, and it is heavily marketed to women here.
So a lot of those factors come into play. A lot of people cite the fact that there are more searches for pornography in Utah than other places. We can joke about the fact that that's like paid pornography.
So we're honest.
We're honest.
Yeah, yeah. Paid subscriptions.
There's a lot of body talk, and there are ways to critique this and to look at this. There's also the fact that marriage is very central to Mormonism, and there appears to be more actively LDS women than men, and so there's definitely some competition in terms of dating. So there are so many reasons why there's just this conflation of issues about why bodies and body image is such a thing here to talk about.
Well, and one thing that people listening need to know is it's not homogenous in terms of religious practice here. Like we do, not everybody is LDS here.
Oh, yeah.
So, but it's also like it's a cultural element of just living here too.
It bleeds into the culture, Utah and beyond.
Right. So like even people who are not Mormon might get married a little younger if they live here in Utah versus other places and have maybe more kids or so I feel like we're kind of in this intersection of yes, there's like religious elements, but it's mostly like a cultural
It's culture.
thing.
Yeah, it's culture.
One of the factors we often bring up is kind of a tricky one, and it's this idea that when women aren't able to find value and empowerment and validation in other areas of life, they'll often turn to their bodies as their main source of power. This is true in any variety of cultures, certainly not specific to Mormonism. But it's especially tricky when we have an all-male leadership in the church, and a hugely overwhelming percentage of male leadership in politics as well, not just here. But this is tough because men are gaining their validation and gaining power in lots of different ways. And this is true all all throughout life. We talk about how men, even in media, are in roles and, getting roles because of all different factors. Not just that they look good in certain cases, but that the looks come in a big, huge variety of different ways to look and be attractive. And also they're being valued for athleticism, intelligence, humor, so many different things, whereas women overwhelmingly, especially when we've all grown up in media, have been primarily valued for how they look, and looking one specific way. And so it's tough when you grow up and maybe you don't get an education. Maybe you don't see women who are in leadership positions. Maybe you don't see women who have careers that you think are interesting or even really have careers at all. And so when you grow up in an environment like that, it's easy to think that your greatest source of value comes from being the thinnest one in the room, being looking young even as you age, getting your body back immediately after having children, wearing all the greatest fashions. There. Yeah, I used air quotes. Getting your body back. Oh, it's the worst phrase. But there are just so many ways that women are sold these messages that you need to look a certain way, you need to stay young forever, you need to be incredibly thin, you gotta have clear skin, no wrinkles, you gotta have long, thick, flowing hair.
Big boobs, you fix those boobs after babies, like all of it.
Right. Long eyelashes. It's just new ideals are coming up every single day. And so when we're sold all of these ideals about what it means to look like a successful, happy woman who's worthy of love and desirable, then it's easy to make that your job. It's easy to make that your occupation, just to constantly be in the gym, at the spa.
And you're validated for it.
Right. Oh, yeah. It works, too, in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work in the long run, because that power, that validation that you get from your appearance, not only is it impossible to hold on to because we are humans and we are aging and we are changing and growing.
People are giving it to you. Like, people are giving you your power. It can be taken away as freely as it's given.
Right, yeah. Not only is it something that you gotta chase for the rest of your life and it's changing according to the market every single day, but it's something that you don't get to decide for yourself whether everyone around you finds you attractive and, thinks that you're the greatest thing around. Those ideals are changing every single day, and it's something that is bestowed upon you and can be taken away just as easily as it was given.
So I think it's important for anyone listening to hear what you're saying as a very general, picture of what could be going on. Because what I'm imagining is someone might listen and say, well, I was raised in a home where I saw a mom who did this, and where I was really body positive and felt great, and and I don't want those emails, just so you know. I don't need them
either.
Oh. Like I'm so happy when there's so many great stories of amazing role models and an amazing way of getting raised and all that stuff. And so I think it's important to say this isn't like nitpicking any one person and saying if you don't fit this, then you obviously are wrong or bad. It's like this is just sort of in general, if we're to speak in generalities. This is what we notice.
Yeah, these are cultural trends. It's a lot of what we see. We've been doing this work for 10 years now here in Salt Lake, the perfect place to do it. And, I can tell you truthfully that Lindsay and I have felt incredibly called to do this work. We being able to get our master's degrees and our PhDs and have it all funded and do dissertations with amazing women and have award-winning dissertations that people have gotten value from academically, and being able to do Beauty Redefined for 10 years, all of this isn't our own doing. We do this because we feel
there's
this drive. Oh my gosh, there's such a need.
There's a need. Right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And we talk about how we've gotten backlash, but honestly, the backlash that we've received is probably 1% of the feedback we've been given.
Yeah.
So of course, when a new concept comes out, people are annoyed that we would even challenge the idea that modesty needs to look one way and should be enforced one way. But over the years, that's really loosened up a lot.
And that might just be their initial reaction, and then maybe they sit with it and say, oh, you know what, there are some really good points there.
Right.
And then maybe...
And they've seen the negative effects of it being enforced in really strict ways and things like that.
Yeah.
But overwhelmingly, we've received such incredible feedback from people who even just take the simplest foundational aspects of our work, this idea that women are more than just bodies, when we
You're
can
like,
see more in
mind
ourselves.
blown.
Yeah,
It's true.
totally. And it changes their perspective because it grows on you. We might plant that little seed, the idea that women are more than bodies, and we can see more in ourselves and other people. And that will change the way, maybe it'll change the way you dress. Maybe it'll change the way you look at how other people dress. Maybe it'll change the way you relate to your husband and your family and your sons, that you're concerned about seeing other women. It might cause us to love other women and have a little bit more compassion for them. And really, it can only improve the way we live our lives. You might think that some of the things we said here today are too broad and too general, and they probably are in a lot of cases, and that's okay. We want people to recognize that this is an individual thing, and if this is something that you can relate to, if you recognize the feeling of not getting validation or not even knowing that you can find empowerment in other ways outside of looking great all the time, we just want you to know that there are other ways. If you're more than a body, then you can look outside of that to find your purpose, your mission, your power. Like, this whole idea of empowerment gets co-opted by a lot of industries who say, like, empowerment can come through a new red lipstick, or Botox is empowerment. And we can say that you can find power in a lot of other ways than just changing your appearance. And so look outside for your mission. Your mission and your power, for us, it came through our pain.
It did.
We recognized that the body shame that was just so stunting and so limiting for us throughout so much of our lives was something that actually showed us our missions. Because if we didn't experience this body shame and just crippling anxiety about how we looked through so much of our lives, we wouldn't even care that so many other women feel the exact same way. And it has pushed us for so many years. So look inside yourself at what triggers you to feel self-conscious, what pushes you into the next fad diet, into the next cosmetic surgery, or the whatever new fashion is assured to make you look amazing so other people will, compliment you or validate you or whatever. Look outside of all of those things and try to find what it is that really has shown you who you are and what you can do to contribute to a world that needs you, not just a pretty vision of you, but all of you.
Love that. So, and just circling back to that Utah question, I also want to say, like, you said this side of, like, yes, we think that maybe it is a particularly troubling place for body image, but I also think, it's important to say this is not unique to Utah by any means either.
Oh,
like,
yeah, no.
Like, I know I have listeners all over. You have readers, listeners, course members from all over too. This is, it just potentially is one of those places that's like kind of a hotbed.
It is,
if you will.
Well, I feel like people all over the country ask, like, so what is it about Mormons and Utahns that, like, we've gotten the question before, why are Mormons so beautiful?
Yeah, that is a question. I've heard that sentiment quite a bit. People come to Utah and they're like, what?
Yeah, totally.
Everyone here is...
And we kind of answer it in some of the same ways. First of all, you could say it's that light in their eyes.
Yeah. It's that glow.
But what about the ones that aren't?
I know. The darkness. No, not at all. Not at all. But it's also like, when you grow up in a culture that places so much value on beauty, whether it's here or otherwise, then you might spend more money and put a lot more emphasis on that, and that leads to maybe looking more beautiful according to cultural standards.
We're raising the bar for each other, you know?
Yeah, it's a hard thing. When you grow up and your mom cares a lot about how her hair looks and her makeup and, having a body that looks a certain way, then you're probably going to feel a lot of that pressure too. It gets passed down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to even think, okay, well then why? Like, what is that? Like, where did that even come from? I'm sure that could be a whole nother podcast.
Yes, it is.
Super fascinating stuff. Would you want to add anything else to kind of either of the topics of, we spent a lot of time on modesty and a lot of time on kind of Utah and culture here in this area of the country. What else do you want to say?
I mean, having grown up in Idaho and lived in Utah for a long time, I can also say that the most amazing, smart, educated, driven, progressive women I have ever met are right here in Utah. I love them. I am so grateful for the ones that are members of the church, and for women that aren't. I am grateful for every single woman who can recognize that she is more than a body, and for every single woman who doesn't know it yet. I think we all have so much good work to do in the world. Like Lindsay and I are truly driven and called to this work because we care about women. Like I can't say it enough. It's not because we're trying to make enemies. We're the most conflict averse people you can imagine. I have hives right now, and so does Lindsay, just talking about this subject because it's scary and we don't want to make people mad. But I hope even in our passion in talking about this, you can feel that love that we have for you, or that you have for yourself or other women in your life, because this work comes down to caring about you so much, knowing that you have such important work to do. And if you're stuck thinking about your body as your job, your body as a threat to others, you're not going to do the work that we are so desperate for you to do. Like, I can't say it enough.
And we're recording this on International Women's Day.
We are! Oh, happy International Women's Day.
And one thing that I would add that has been really crucial, we very much believe in the power of women. And we know that as women come to learn and understand themselves better from the inside, not just from an outside perspective or how others might perceive them, we can tap into that power. We can make great changes for good in any institution that we're a part of. If that's a church, if that's a school, if that's a workplace, if that's a family, even if it's just individually, we can improve our lives and our communities and the world around us when we see ourselves as more than maybe what our culture has taught us to see ourselves. And I think that's what's really important here, is just being able to see more so that we can be more, regardless of the culture you grew up in, regardless of what other people around you might think or see in you. You are more. And I hope that we can all learn to see that in ourselves and everyone else too.
That's so beautiful. You guys are so good with words.
Thank you.
You've announced that you're writing a book. That's super exciting.
Yeah.
Should we just talk about that briefly to get people pumped about it?
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a long time, but yeah. We have about 3 months to deliver the manuscript.
We have 6 months, Linz.
Oh, do we?
September.
Oh, good. That's a relief.
The book More Than a Body will be coming to anywhere books are sold in fall 2020.
Yeah, our publisher is Houghton Mifflin. We're super excited about that. One of the biggest publishers in the world.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing.
It's
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So awesome.
Yeah, we're so excited. It's definitely the biggest break Beauty Redefined has ever gone to get our message out to a bigger audience.
That's so fabulous. So let's talk really briefly about what we're doing together coming up in April.
April 4th, we've got an event coming up.
Yeah, so anyone listening who's local to Salt Lake City or able to drive a little bit to be here, do you want to explain, Lexi, what we're up to?
Sure. We are having an event at the University of Utah called Body of Evidence, where we are bringing together Beauty Redefined, Paige Smathers, and
Jessie Hoffman,
who is so incredible, to talk about the evidence of nutrition, of how to actually attain body image resilience, how to cut through all the fad diets, the fad,
faulty
wellness.
Body image fixes.
Oh, yes, the faulty body image fixes to get somewhere so much happier.
Yeah, so it's going to be this night of kind of diving into some of the evidence around these topics that, that we talk about together, that maybe where our work differs just a little bit. Mm-hmm. And really it's a good event for anybody who feels like they want to share this stuff with their family, but they're not really sure like how to talk about it. Mm-hmm. This could be a really friendly place to kind of bring people who aren't aware of intuitive eating or body positivity or body image resilience, these types of concepts. So we're going to dive in, and it's going to be really like a safe place for people to learn some new things. Yes. So I've had a lot of people kind of reach out wanting that type of thing in the past, and I'm super excited you both are joining us because it's going to be a really fun night. So it'll be April 4th, starting, hopefully, we're thinking 6:30. We're going to be more specific when this podcast airs, so just go to the website. It's positive-nutrition.com/workshop, and you can sign up there. And then tickets will go up by $10 a week after we publish this podcast, so get on it soon. And it will hopefully we'll sell out, but who knows?
Oh yeah.
If we do, we'll just let you know. You won't be able to buy them anymore, but we're stoked.
We're excited.
About it. Yeah,
it'll be great.
Okay, Lindsay and Lexi, thanks so much for joining me to record this episode. You both are fabulous. I'm so grateful for all your work and stoked about your book. You'll have to come back when it's
sure.
out. If I'm still podcasting, I have to stay really neutral about things that far in advance.
Totally.
Woo! I don't know.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.